people who have checked in so far. It's much appreciated. I'd like to welcome you along to this webinar between Wimmera Development Association Leadership Wimmera. And first off, we'll acknowledge the 5 traditional owner groups of the land which we meet, which is Watchabollock, Ware Guyar, Jabbergolk, Jarawa, Jali. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. That moves on to the next point. Obviously, emergency evacuation for you all. It's every person to themselves in this situation, because I'm sure you've all got your own emergency evacuation plan, which you'll put in place. I will take no responsibility if there's an emergency in your household, which I assume you all are where you are. Toilets, you know where they are far better than I. Just a couple other housekeeping details. This session is being recorded and some screenshots may be taken, and just as a matter of course to realise, and this is unique to this Zoom chat, basically all Zoom chats that are on the side, which we'll be asking you to put questions in, do get stored and recorded. That's the way Zoom works, as most of these webinar technologies work. So what you say is recorded, just as a matter of course for you to understand that. And the other piece of thing we'd like to mention is make sure you've got a pen and paper. I think Kate's going to try and get some sweat out of you as much as she can. So if you've got a pen and paper, that'd be much appreciated. And also, if you look at the Zoom, and you'll see that bar down the bottom, which I'm sure you're all experts and gurus on it at the moment and teaching your parents and grandparents how to use, you'll see that if you wanted to ask any questions, you won't be actually able to use your voice in this webinar session. You have to use the chat bar. Jessica's going to be manning the chat bar and forwarding those questions on to Kate. And then at the appropriate time, Kate will read out the question and the answer. So as we are about to dive in, I'll just say thank you, Jessica, for putting it together. As a person looking after Leadership Wimmera, it's much appreciated. And thank you, Kate, for coming along and presenting. And just as a sort of thing of why this is, community leaders are lent on heavily in uncertain times. And I think each of you is a community leader. And we can't get any more uncertain than we are at the moment with COVID-19. Information is changing every day. There is no actual end in sight. And the plan for going forward is being progressed by everyone as they go forward. I apologise about this background noise. And stress spreads amongst the community as quickly as it spreads itself. So how do you as a community leader move forward and navigate through these uncertain times while maintaining your own well-being? So Kate Burke's going to take us through this session. She's a thought leader and mentor, and she is a coach. And she's basically grew up in Elmore, moved across to the Wimmera, spent 20 odd years probably in the Wimmera as a scientist, a researcher, lecturer, and then a agribusiness advisor to farmers. She's now, after that, she's worked for Waikiri as a consultant, and now she's set up her own business. And through that, she's gained a whole heap of experiences and perspectives, had the ups and downs in life. And she's, as I say, I worked with her a couple of years ago with a team at Burke Cropping Group, where we were really working on resilience in our team and individuals. And I think what she's got now and she's going to present is something you'll all find great value. So over to you, Kate. I'm going to turn off my screen during this and be on mute. So it's all over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that introduction. I really feel quite humbled to be doing this. As I mentioned on the ABC radio today, you know, the kid from the bush going over after uni, going over to the Wimmera in 1990, and I didn't even know what a Lutheran was, to, you know, end up spending 22 years in that area and Wimmera really becoming close to my heart. So it's great to be able to give back to the community. I'll just share my screen so we can all see the presentation. How's that? Can you see that? Good. please yell out on the chat bar if you can't see it, Chris or Jess. I must admit it's very strange when you're not being able to see your audience. So bear with me as utilise this technology, and we'll see how we go. But my job today is really to give you choice. That's what Chris asked me to do. And what I've got for you is an all-you-can-eat buffet of practical tools to help manage uncertainty and to help us weather this storm. So then it's your job to pick up the tools that you'd like from that buffet and ultimately make some choices that works for you. How's that sound? Okay, so just so you can see where I'm at the moment. This is our place in Echuca, and a very nice place for Think Agri headquarters, and it's a pretty good place to be self-isolated, really. And I guess I'm relearning the skills in terms of entertaining myself and staying at home that I had as a bored teenager. I've been making stuff in the shed, and one thing I haven't done is resorted to playing all 6 hands of Chinese checkers on my own yet, but I'm actually in a very fortunate position to be busy and connected, and have plenty going on, and I certainly haven't got the pressure that a lot of you have at the moment in your more direct roles in this crisis. Just wanted to give you a bit of context before we get stuck into it. Essentially, this is a photo of my dad. It was taken a few months before he died. He died on February the 8th, 2009. Now you might recognise that date. It was the day after Black Saturday. And he was 85 years old. He farmed for 70 years. He was a child of the Depression. He top and tailed his farming career with a decade of drought. And he carried a lifelong guilt about farming through World War II when his brothers and friends were in active service. His generation, and the one before it, the one up on the wall here, my grandmother and her 2 aunts, they went through a lot of challenges that we haven't seen, and they survived those challenges and they adapted to those challenges. And I really believe that we'll adapt to this challenge too, just as well as they adapted to the challenges that they saw throughout their very eventful lives. To help us adapt to those challenges, I've put together a white paper that I've called Weathering the Storm, using personal power to steer yourself and your community through uncertain times. And I've put this together based on evidence and research from others, and the experience of serving others in uncertain times, and the knowledge that I've gained in how to be of service in a more resilient and sustainable manner than perhaps I did when I was serving farmers in the Wimmera 10 years ago. So I'd just like to pause there for a minute and see how you're going, and hopefully you can use the chat bar here. And what I want you to do is let's play a bit of bingo. So you're probably thinking, what the hell is online this bingo business about? And if you can't find your chat bar, go over down the bottom of your screen, and you can pull up the little toolbar. If you go as far right and press more, you'll find chat there. And then if you can type those any questions you have along the way, type them in. But what I want you to do now is I want you to take a piece of paper like this. I want you to draw, do it in thirds. So put 3 lines across the top, and then I want you to put 3 lines across the sides, and then divide it again. So you'll end up with 18 squares. So a little bit of kindergarten there. I hope you can manage that exercise. And once you've done that, I'd like you to label them from 1 to 18. And just put a little box down the bottom for the 19th hole, because that's obviously very important in these times. You'll see on your screen at the moment, on the shared screen there, that I've put some, what I want to do is get an understanding through the chat box of how your world is. I've jotted down some things that where my world's been at in the last month. I haven't felt very calm. I've certainly felt scared. There's been times when I just wanted to be in bed under a blanket. As I worked my way through what it meant for us personally and our business, I've got back in the driver's seat. And there's times when you just can't make a decision. And I'm sure plenty of these thoughts and feelings and actions will resonate with you. So what I'd like you to do is on your little list here, just like you to put a tick on the ones that you resonate with. And if they really, really resonate, put 4 or 5 ticks. Okay, where's my texter? So for example, in week 1, I felt really scared. I was very scared that at some stage through this crisis, somebody that I would know and love would die. And it wasn't until I named what I was scared of that I was able to move past that. So I'd love you to do that little exercise and then jump on the chat bar and just pop in the numbers that you relate to or the words that you relate to, so we can get a sense of it along the way. How am I going there? Is everyone happy with that? That's fantastic. Okay, righto. So here we are, 15 Marma Street, Matara. This was our home from 1996 until 2012. Some of you on the line have been to that home. Great to see you on the line, Paula, Johnny G. There's a few others I recognise there, so fantastic. Jenny Miller, great to see you too, or see you on the chat bar. So while I was living in that house, and that where the blind is there, that was my office. I did a PhD out of that room. I worked for John Stutchbury and Associates out of that room, and helped people through drought out of that room as well. This photo is towards, I guess, getting towards the end of our time in the Wimmera. And it's a photo from a presentation that I gave in conjunction with Felicity Pritchard, who many of you would know. She worked for herself in those days, but she's had a couple of stints with the Department of Ag. And this was at the end of the 2007 season. 2006, if you recall, was a severe drought. 2007 was a little bit better, but there was a terrible grain marketing fiasco where a lot of people lost a lot of money as well, and the season cut short. And one of the big decisions we were trying to help people with, because there was such an opportunity in the dairy industry, was could they cut their crops for hay? And so we did some research in conjunction with GRDC and Longanon and BCG, and then I was presenting this, and at the time I was working for John Stutchbury and Associates that later became JSA. What that photo doesn't tell you is the one on the right pretty much summed up where I was at after 2006 and 2007. I was cooked. It's really hard work trying to advise people and tell them stuff that they don't want to hear. When they're influenced by their neighbours, you do all the logic, you make a decision, and a neighbour pops in after church and says, oh, you're mad if you cut that hay. And those sort of things were starting to wear me down at that stage. Interestingly, I remained doing that sort of work for another 5 years, and I didn't have the toolbox that I have now to be of service to others without wearing myself out. The warning signs were there, But I did what most of us are taught to do is, and what our parents did, is really just worked harder and didn't make enough time for myself. So I'm motivated to share these tools that I've learned over the last decade so other people can have an easier path as they lead people through uncertainty. And the way to do that is by personal power. So if we serve well, be fulfilled and stay well, we can do that by accessing the tools from the personal power buffet. So interested, you can just check in on the check room there to see how everyone's going. I noticed number one's a big one on the list, which is good, bit of calmness, plenty of 12s, plenty of 14s, 13s, lots of 18s, so a real mix. And I guess, you know, we all feel, I like 19, the virtual drinking expert, that I'm becoming one of those, all good things in moderation. So I'll just get stuck into the presentation now and take you through these personal power attributes. The first one I wanted to start off with is thought management, and it may not sound like an action or something we can physically do, but it really is. How many people are feeling like this at the moment? Who's had that thought buffet on high rotation? You know, I listened to the background briefing and I could really feel the frustration of the staff at the hospital about people not understanding the extent of this and perhaps not following procedure. You know, why don't people just get this? Those of us in business or running large or any sort of business in our household will be thinking, well, you know, we're going to have enough money. And none of us know what the futures hold. So there's all these thoughts. So what I'd like you to do now is, on another piece of paper, I want you to write down the biggest thoughts that are going on in your head. So these are the ones that you have in your mind the moment you wake up. They're the ones that are just there hanging all day and they just won't go away. And they keep popping up, even if you're taking some relaxing time or doing something with the kids. You know, this is the thought in the back of your mind the whole time. So there might be one or two, or it could be 3 or 4 or 5, but just jot those down and we'll see what we can do with them. Vanessa, this is my head always. I can relate to that. But it is possible that you can dial these things down. One analogy I like to use, you know, there's a lot of people, basically thought drafting, the way I refer to it, is essentially a form of mindfulness and acceptance. I call it thought drafting because it reminds me of just taking your thoughts and then running them through the sheep yards and putting them through the race. And so that's a metaphor that works for me. If that one doesn't work for you, you might like the 3 buckets. You think of the red bucket as the thoughts that you're concerned about, the yellow bucket as the thoughts that you've got some influence over, and the green bucket is the things that you can actually have direct influence and control. So one thing you might do, if this is really comes from Stephen Covey's work from a long time ago, and I've just put this up here, very, very high-tech presentation, this one. So this is what he called his circle of influence, concern and control. And I've just converted that to 3 buckets because that's what works in my head. So of those 5 thoughts that you have written down, or 2 or 3 thoughts, I want you to put them in those buckets. So what are the things, are those thoughts things that you're just very rightly concerned about but can't actually do anything about? So an example of that is, how long will this thing last in terms of COVID-19 impacting on us? We're very concerned about it, but we have absolutely no influence and control over that. another example of something that you have some control over is, I'm going to strangle that kid. You know, we're all living under the one roof. You actually have a choice that you can make there, and it's probably not a great idea. Although we don't have children, but I know there was plenty of times in our house where I'm sure my mother would have loved to have strangled me. Things like, why don't people get it? Again, we can influence that a little bit, but ultimately we can't do anything about that. We just have to accept that there will be some people that won't see the gravity of this situation until it hits them in the face. So I'd be interested to know if, again, use the chat room and just pop those thoughts in there, in your chat, you know, which ones that are in the control box, which ones are in the concern box, and see how you go. Now, what do we do with them? I'm not saying ignore them. I'm sort of saying just sit them in the back room. It's a bit like when I was teaching at Longy. You imagine it, first year ag college students. This was 1994. I wasn't that far out of uni myself, so I was 25 years old, and I've got this, you know, back then there was quite big numbers. There was probably 30 kids in the classroom, 18 to 20-year-olds. There was always those pesky, distracted boys at the back in their sort of moleskins, and thinking they're pretty cool and thinking they probably don't need to be there. And they were really annoying. And then there was, you know, always someone who was pretty tired and hungover. And then there was a mixture. Now, when I was at my best, I could choose just not to engage in the ones that were annoying me and shift my attention to the rest of the class. But when I wasn't at my best, and there was a bit of that, you know, there may have been the odd outburst. So your thoughts are like that. Just the ones that you can't do anything about, acknowledge them, notice them, know that they feel uncomfortable, and just pop them up at the back of the class. This type of approach comes from the mindfulness research of a guy called Steve Hayes, and it was really popularized by a guy called Russ Harris, who wrote a book called The Happiness Trap. And it's a really good resource and a very good and simple read. So we certainly don't have any control, Jenny, as to how long this would control for, but we do, as you say, it's how you deal with this situation. That's the bit we have control, and that's the sort of stuff I want to talk about today. And one of the things we can do is be grateful and be a little bit happy and remember some happy moments. And so what I've done is thrown a few of my happy snaps of my time in the Wimmera today. This photo, I think, was 2009. So all these young girls are 11 years older than this, and most of them were down at uni, and now they're in their parents' house along with their parents, and they're obviously a lot bigger than they were now. So we've got some trainee nurses in there, trainee graphic design who did the work for Weathering the Storm, trainee teacher, and a couple of year 12 students. And the lady in the middle with the orange top on is a Wimmera girl herself. So certainly it's great. I'm really enjoying reconnecting with Matilda today, and it's a bit self-indulgent, I know, but it's good. It's good. There's a few other things coming in. You know, what will the future bring financially, personally, and socially? Well, yeah, that's right. We don't know. And what happens if I lose my job? Now, that is a genuine concern. And I guess that's the one of the sorts of things that we can do a little bit about, which is just some scenario analysis and plan for different possible futures. And we'll get onto that a little bit later. So the second one, what we've just done then, by noticing what our thoughts are, we've actually been aware of ourselves. So that's pretty cool. You're probably more self-aware than you ever thought you were. And we're also probably noticing the people around us, you know, might be a little bit crankier than normal, a little less rational, and that's good. So we're aware of them as well. And being aware of what triggers us and triggers others is really useful in coping with difficult times. It's essentially what's known as emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence was made famous by a guy called Daniel Goleman, and more recently, Travis Bradbury writes some really good blogs on this. I've put quite a bit of stuff in the white paper on this concept. And I've just drawn a very simple diagram of a simplified version of emotional intelligence and managing oneself. It can be a bit hard to get your head around, but I liken it to footy smarts. So, you know, you look at someone like Dustin Martin or Patrick Dangerfield, they know when to get involved in the play. They know when to hold back from the play. They just know what to do at the right time. And emotionally intelligent people know how to handle themselves and know how to handle others depending on the situation. And just like footy, it's a skill and it can be developed. Some are born with more natural ability than others, but others that work hard can really develop this skill. A really good example of this, and no apologies for the references to Matawa and the Mighty Boroughs in their premiership year, still going on. The local footy hero, John Delahunty, he's not only an incredibly natural footballer. I've known John since he was a kid, and he's incredibly emotionally intelligent, and his ability to read people and get the best out of them was the real secret sauce that led to that Minyip Matawa premiership. And I'll refer back to that a bit later as well, because there's a classic example from his three-quarter time speech. Speak of the devil, you might recognise the young kid with the big hair there, might be premiership coach John Delahunty, and the little kid might be a former TUI medalist, Kieran Delahunty, learning how to play bad golf with some of their elders. Just checking in with you all again. Lots of questions. How do we imagine a new future rather than long for the past? Again, we'll have a go at that in a minute. How do I progress my career through this? Should I accept that it is time to put the career progression on hold? Really good question. And I guess at the moment, I think it's about coming back to the present and the now and just getting through a few things at a time. But we can do some possibility analysis to help that. So now I'm on to the third selection of on our buffet, and there's a lot in each of these. I'm glossing over them, particularly this one here. This is what you're getting here is more like a menu, I guess, rather than being able to tuck into that main course, because it's a complex subject and there is lots you can do to maintain your resilience. I'm a cynic sometimes, and I have an aversion to overused and misused words. So I used to be a little bit ho-hum on resilience. But being a bit older and wiser and understanding what it really means, it's actually not an overused word. It's actually the key to thriving in uncertain times. And what resilience does, it speaks to the strengths of people, because resilience is harvesting your key strengths. And I was just talking before about a strength of emotional intelligence, and that's a classic example of something that can really help with your resilience. I really like Catherine McEwen's scale of resilience. Catherine McEwen is an organisational psychologist from South Australia, and she's done some marvellous work with some researchers from the University of South Australia, where they really wanted to understand more about resilience in the workplace. So this isn't resilience where people have undergone vicarious trauma which most previous studies had tackled. This is what makes a person in day-to-day life show more resilience. And what they found, and the important thing about resilience in her work, is that one of the most important concepts to understand is that resilience is actually a state. It's not a trait. It's something that will change up and down depending on the circumstances. And so we're probably all feeling a little bit less resilient at the moment, given the stress we're under. But it's something that we can build, and it's something that we can maintain. So it's sort of like fitness, you know, and that's a classic example. You need to work at all the bits to remain relatively fit. And I'm not talking about, you know, being a marathon runner. I'm just talking about being fit and healthy as a human. And that's where to pitch resilience. Now, basically what Catherine means when she's talking about resilience is that it's being able to be productive, navigate hardship, navigate uncertainty, and stay well or maintain your well-being. There are a lot more detail in the white paper, and the work that we've got here in front of us is the scale they developed out of their research, that you could really narrow it down to these 7 components. The bottom ones are fairly self-explanatory, but the top 2, really what she's talking about there is being true to oneself and using that as the engine to drive resilience, and having emotional regulation, the emotional intelligence I just talked about, and having a reason for being and a purpose, and feeling connected to others. Those 2 things, S1 and S2, really power the rest, which I'm sure is fairly logical to all of you. Speaking of resilience, I don't think there's a better example than Mama Lake in the Northeast drought. So this was the dry lake bed in Matai, and it happened to be our wedding day. And when you drive past Lake Mama now and see that precinct and the water there, it's a really good example that things don't stay the same and things can get better. So just put that up there for a bit of motivation. How to motivate children in this environment? Oh, that one's too hard for me. Not much help there at all. I'm sorry, but anyone else, feel free to jump in and answer some of the questions that are on there if you've got some good ideas. I guess it's basically, I'll come back to that actually, because a lot of it's about being kind to each other. Okay, so a lot of the questions that we've talked about so far have been wondering about the uncertainty and what if, and you know, what if this happens, what if that happens. So, you know, we need a way of moving from uncertainty to possibility. And unless we address those components of resilience I talked about before, we can't get there, because at the moment our brain's been hijacked. So if we can look after ourselves and to try and get some sense of less hijackiness in the brain, then we can actually go through a bit of a process. Now, this is something I probably didn't understand that well 10 years ago, and I used to get frustrated when I couldn't get people to look at different scenarios. Fantastic, Fiona. BCG has some ideas for farmers' children on our website. That's a really good resource. Keep the chat going. I like this guy, Edward De Bono. Pretty smart fellow with the thinking hats. In the future, instead of striving to be right at a high cost, it will be more appropriate to be flexible and plural at a low cost. If you can't accurately predict the future, then you must flexibly be prepared to deal with various possible futures. Excuse me. And that is effectively the rationale that I've used and that I use with my colleague John Stutchbury and our the various colleagues we had at JSA Independent, is we use this premise to get people through different growing seasons where we didn't know what the end game might look like, but we could put various plans in place and then work towards those plans. So these are the 3 tips, and then we'll do a bit of an exercise on this. My first tip is to fear less. And that might sound trite, but if we're less fearful of adverse events, then at least we can do something about it, because they're going to happen anyway. And at the moment, we're in a scary situation. We don't know what the future holds, but we just need to be able to move from that fear and paralysis into a situation where we can accept that this isn't particularly nice, and then try and deal with it. So that's the first one. Just looking here, checking in at the chat room again. Paul Kennedy, ABC, great role model as a dad. Absolutely, Paula, and thanks for coming in. Paula was one of my key sanity people in the 2000s, and one of the things we used to do was walk around the Minyip Road, lap around the boundary of Matoa most mornings during the week. And you know, unfortunately we can't do a lot of that at the moment, but if you can get out there with a walking buddy, just one, go ahead, it's really good for you. Horsham Ag Society has a Facebook plan to create animals on the farm videos for kids to watch. Fantastic. And another one here, Andrew Cross is the ag comment. I assume that means ag contact. So let's go back to our tips. The next tip is use what you know to plan for the unknown. And I'll go through that again in a moment. The third tip is to use resources and tools to validate gut feel. And there's a reason for that. There's actually research that shows that using information helps move your brain from the emotional stress side, the limbic part of the brain, to the rational part of the brain. There was a study that they did at a university in the US where they gave people some information on a coin flipping exercise, and then the other half of the group didn't have that information. Then they scanned the brains of the people as they went through this exercise. It was predicting whether the coin was going to be heads or tails. Now, those that had some odds, some information about it, their brain stayed in the rational space. Those that had no information, their brain was in the emotional space. So information is gold as long as that information is valid and not just some rubbish from social media. So you know, that's my beware fake information and fake news. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to get you to do a little more work. I'd like you to get a piece of paper. So let's go through an example of doing some scenario analysis and imagining various possible futures. I'd like you to take a piece of paper like so, and this time turn it into thirds by thirds. So there'll be nine spots, and across the top, let's put these months. Let's go 2 months, 6 months, and 10 months. So there are 3 different scenarios. Okay, so you're going to end up with a piece of paper that looks like that. feel free if this isn't making sense, yell out into the chat box by all means. So we've got our 3 scenarios. Now I'd like you to, down the length of the page, I'm going to put 3 steps. This is I guess the way I've been thinking about working our way through this whole episode. One of the things I do is I'm on the board of Rich River Golf Club, and obviously this has been a big thing for us. It's a bit bigger than the Mattara Golf Club that I used to be involved in. Mattara, we had 40 or 50 members, I think, by the time I left. Rich River's got a few thousand members, and it's a business that turns over 25 million. Massive hospitality and gaming aspect, as well as two 18-hole golf courses. So we've had a lot of decision making to do in the last couple of weeks. We've had to lay off 140 staff or stand them down. So it's been a really challenging time and incredibly stressful for our CEO and our chair, and incredibly stressful for our staff and team. So one of the ways I started to talking about it was, well, let's break it into 3 bits. Let's break it into survival. What do we need to do to survive this? So in the case of the golf club, what do we need to do so that we're still here when the social distancing laws come off? Then once we can just get through that survival bit, what do we need to do to be of service to those that we need to be of service to? So in our case, it's our members. They've paid a fee, and they've got very restricted golf options. So how can we serve them in other ways? And the third bit I've been thinking about is, what do we need to do to then set up for that bounce back? And I think they're 3 pretty good categories. So perhaps what you could do is, on your sheet of paper, have a section for survival, a section for service, and a section for setup. And then have a think about that and what you need to do under those 3 possible futures. And you could change what those futures look like. You know, if 2 months, 6 months, and 10 months doesn't make sense, put different numbers in there. But then start listing down in the grid under survival, service, and setup, what are the things you need to do? What are the issues that are going to arise, either at family or at work? Once you get that stuff out of your head, you can't do anything about it at the moment, but it feels better. And you've got a bit of a plan, because what you've done is you've started to prepare for several possible futures. As I said before, we use this approach with our farmers for a long time, and it was a really satisfying thing to do to help them work through the myriad of uncertainties. So what if we don't get spring rain? What if we do get spring rain? How much nitrogen will we need? Should we cut that for hay? And you can imagine these futures and then put plans in place to execute them. Is that making sense? Please yell out in the chat box if I've lost you. So we might just have another little break, and I'll go to my little bingo. So one of the things I did to keep myself occupied was to make a COVID-19 bingo barrel. So I'm just going to pick out a number. So this is number 6. And if you've got number 6 on your list, please type it in the chat box, and you're the lucky recipient of a gold star. And our next number is number 2. So if you've got number 2, please type it in your name in the chat box, or let me know. Righto, let's get back into it. Hopefully we're going okay for time. Whoops, I've gone a little bit too far there. We're on the home run, believe it or not, even though seems like we're only halfway. This one's a quick one. We need to own less stress. These exercises, like doing this scenario analysis, it's not easy. It takes energy, and some of you won't be ready for that yet, and you won't be able to see through the fog. If you're carrying a really big load, all your stress, everyone at your work stress, all your family stress, and worrying about lots and lots of things and people, you need to get rid of some of that stress to create room so that you can function well. You need a bit of headroom. So, you know, your bored teenager, maybe that's their stress. And perhaps what we need to do is just observe that we've got a bored teenager. Easier said than done, I'm sure, unless you can lock yourself in another room. But it's not your job to take on everybody's stress, particularly if you're in an advisory role, or it's, you know, you can only give the advice. You can't own and take home everyone else's worries. It will send you nuts. And what happens when we're stressed and under pressure, a little bit of pressure is okay, so our stress is okay, but when we take on everyone else's stress, our achievement and productivity actually drops off. So there is some science behind these comments, and it was a very stress-less thing. One good thing for stress release was being able to beat Sheep Hills to win a premiership, and I'm sure Jenny Miller, you can relate to that. Well done, Darren Webster, having number 2 twice. I can relate to that. Okay, now we're getting into the really important stuff. So ditching judgment. And when I'm talking about ditching judgment, I'm actually talking about, firstly, stop judging yourself. When I first started seeing a mental health professional a long time ago, the first thing they said was be kind to yourself. And I didn't know what that meant. And, you know, over the years, it's been this theme, you need to be kinder to yourself. You need to be kinder to yourself. And then one day I thought, oh, I know what that is. It's stopping that I'm not good enough story. It's stopping judging and just accept yourself without the temptation to put a judgment on it. And for me, it was a real game changer. And in this current time, a very smart young lady said to me the other day, a friend of mine, in times like these, kindness and self-compassion is all we've got. And I just think that's such a sensible thing to do. Give ourselves a break, give the people in our household a break, give our teenage kids a break, give our work colleagues a break. These are unprecedented times, and the psychologists are telling us that when everyone's in a heightened state of stress, now's not the time to be picking little sores. You know, we just have to be kind to each other. This was kindness in action in 2008, and I found this trawling through some photos today where the Matawa community, you know, you can see how droughted the churchyard was. They all got together and tidied up the garden before our wedding. And this beautiful little message that the school kids had put on the wall was how beautiful a day can be when kindness touches it. And I just think that's a really nice thing for us all to remember. Getting closer towards the end now. So role clarity is it's another way of I guess, ditching stress. It's understanding whether the problem's yours or not, and understanding how useful you'll be in that role. So in the work I do, it's far more useful for me to try and stay in the coach role. Obviously in our personal lives, you know, there's opportunities or times where we do need to be in empathy and sympathy, and every now and then a little bit of cynicism doesn't hurt, as long as you're not over here all the time. If you're over here being skeptical about the rules that we're imposed on us at the moment, you know, that could be a very critical and fatal thing to do. So we will shift around. We'll shift around this matrix, but just be mindful of what role you're in at a certain time. You know, I've got a habit sometimes of trying to coach my friends, and it doesn't always go down well. You know, they just need an ear sometimes. My husband doesn't like me managing him. You know, I spend a lot of my time managing stuff, and I'm sure many of you at the moment go home from work and are managing your kids, and they probably just want you to be mum or dad and reassure them. So this is sort of uncut. That's how I was described by this young fella on the left, a young Lachlan Delahunty. And they're my nieces and nephews from the McCormicks about 10 years ago on the right. And you know, one of the things I need to remember is my role as an aunt. I'm not their parent. I'm not their footy coach. I'm just their aunt and to be Auntie Kate to them. So, lucky last, setting boundaries. Now, last year, I had the opportunity to go and give a very similar talk of this about resilience to advisors in New South Wales, up in the drought-stricken areas. I actually chose not to do that because at the time, I could feel that was going to trigger stuff for me and I wouldn't be my very best self. So I made a conscious decision to put on my own oxygen mask and I knocked back that professional opportunity. One of the things I've really learned, I love this quote, stress is not the problem is lack of recovery. You think about it in sport, we recover, but in life and in work, we just keep on going. So it's really vital to try and make some recovery time at the moment, even if it's just 10 minutes on your own or 10 minutes of gardening or whatever it is that helps you relax and recuperate. So we're back to the start. Love you to check in now on what habits you think you could actually, what tiny choices could you make of that buffet that we just went through. And I'd love you to put some of those in the chat room and we'll see how it goes. But this is a great book and it's about being intentional in things we're trying to change. Now, remember, you won't be able to eat everything on the buffet. You'll just be able to pick off a few morsels and make some conscious decisions about those things. So, leading ourselves and others through adversity to advantage, I hope I've given you some tips to do that, and I'd love you to pop some questions in the box. Great seeing some coming through now. Thanks. Chris, over to you.
No worries. Thanks a lot for that, Kate. That was excellent and took us on a journey, a personal journey, and I think at the same time shared a lot around, I suppose, how to look after ourselves. And I think that is possibly the most important thing we can all do is if we look after ourselves in the best situation to look after others. And on the aircraft, when they give you that talk about which everyone concentrates and listens to, hangs on every word, is that they say, yes, give yourself the oxygen first and then you can care for the child next to you. And I think the same is in this situation. Look after yourself and you'll be in the best possible situation to look after others. Part of looking after yourself is obviously having an excellent awareness of how others are travelling around you. So going on an 8-hour bike ride every day to get out of the house, maybe looking after yourself, but probably not really showing the understanding of others around you. So yes, there is a bit of understanding of others, but make sure yourself is fit and healthy, because a healthy mind makes healthier decisions. So thanks a lot for that, Kate. I'd just like to emphasise there, WDA and Leadership Wimmera, we've put this event on. We're really keen to get your feedback on this for all the participants. Is it something that hit the spot? We have the Leadership Wimmera program. We have about 30 participants this year. We'll be doing again a program next year. So if you see the opportunity to engage, we'd appreciate it. We've got over 600 graduates so far, and we try and provide a lot of training support to the alumni, and we'll be building on that in particular in the coming years. We are keen for your feedback, so we will be sending out a chance for you to provide some feedback. I really do encourage you to take that on board and do provide that feedback. It really helps us deliver a better product. You'll also get a chance to feed in to a statewide program, which is tracking sentiment. This is a bit of an experiment, and would once again really appreciate if you dive in, because we're trying to understand across the state how people's sentiment is changing.
Chris, can I just pop in for a tick?
Yep.
There's one thing I forgot to say, and Graham Adams reminded me online, was what was John Delahunty's inspirational three-quarter time quote, and it really relates to that uncertainty process. At three-quarter time, Matawa were under pressure, and they were just sort of getting back into the game, and it was looking really good, and people were starting to get excited, and the players were starting to rah, 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 and John said, hang on, stop. He said, emotion won't win us this grand final. Sticking to the process will win us this grand final. And they started concentrating again. They went out, they stuck to their process, and we won the grand final.
Excellent. I'm sure it was only the speech. I think it was having some great players and people sticking to their roles, and that prompt, that little word was just that little bit to get them there. And I think that's generally, it's not just one thing, it's everything in this situation. So, yeah, I think. Absolutely. But
so, hopefully that answers Graham's question.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. So are there any final questions in that scroll bar, Kate, that you'd like to respond to? Otherwise, we're just on 2 o'clock now, and we were trying to keep it to an hour.
Yeah, I think we've covered everyone, and the ones I couldn't, people have managed to cover them themselves. So it's all good.
And if people want to get in touch with you, Kate, afterwards, are they welcome to do that? And anything else you'd like to add?
It's probably the easiest way to get in touch is to just jump on the website, and there's a phone number on that website, and also an email there. Please do get in touch. And we've got programs in our business where we help take people through these exercises in a more formal setting. Worked really well with the work we did up at Burke, and the resilience work, it really showed dividends further down the track. So there's some great tools out there to be used, and really appreciate this opportunity to work with Wimmera Development Association and Leadership Wimmera.
All right, thanks a lot, Kate. Thanks everyone for participating in the webinar.
Now there's a question here, Chris, how can we get the white paper? Will that be sent out to the participants? Is that the plan?
Jessica, do you want to answer that piece? I'm pretty sure it has or will be very shortly. Yes, that'll be one of the things. So over to you, Jessica, to finish up.
Absolutely. So I've sent the white paper to most participants this morning, but I will be resending it along with a recording of today's session. So if anyone wants to watch back or they missed any pieces, they're more than welcome to revisit that. And as Chris said, there'll also be a survey. We'd just like to hear your feedback and your thoughts about today. Make sure we're hitting the mark or not or what. And that will help guide the future activities of Leadership Wimmera as well. So we appreciate your feedback in advance.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.